Melancholy, a quiet plague that seeps into the bones, unnoticed by the world but ever present in the soul. In the smoke-choked valleys of Victorian England, where the sun rarely pierced the mill's iron grip, it made its home in the hearts of the forgotten. To the mill worker, life was an unbroken chain of monotony. Clocks ticking louder than dreams, hours stitched together with thread and dust. A child at 10, an old man by 30, and always the noise, the relentless roar of the looms drowning out laughter, thought and hope. But melancholy didn't always scream. Often it whispered, in the stillness before dawn, in the ache behind tired eyes, in the silence of an empty supper table. It wore the face of a child gone too soon, and a life never lived beyond the mill gate. But this isn't a story of just sadness. This is a story of unraveling. And it's the erosion of the spirit under the darkened skies at night time, under the coal dust that fell onto the terraced houses. This is a story of a woman who sadly took the life of one of her children, and she also tried to take the lives of 2 others, as well as her own. This is the story of Alice Ann Farrer. In the mid to late 1800s, the Lancashire town of Accrington had managed to avoid the wave of violent crimes that had gripped nearby towns like Haslingden, Blackburn and Burnley. For years it remained untouched by murder, save for the tragic death of a young girl, Henrietta Lever, in 1881. But that peace was shattered in the early hours of Tuesday the 18th of September 1894, when a crime so horrific in nature occurred at number 43 Hyndburn Road. That morning, at around 8:30 a.m, Elizabeth Greenwood was walking past number 43 Hyndburn Road, the home of her sister-in-law, 32-year-old Alice Ann Farrer. Elizabeth noticed something odd. The window curtains were still closed. The children usually left early for school and the house was unusually quiet. Now, concerned, she knocked on the front door several times, but there was no answer. She went to the neighbour, and one of the neighbours on the street was a lady by the name of Mary Elizabeth Jackson. And she had a spare key which would allow her entry into number 43. Both Mary and Elizabeth, when they went to 43 and they opened the door, they had a quick look round. There was no sign of anybody. And that was until Elizabeth herself made her way to the master bedroom. And it was there that they will make, or she will make, a shocking discovery. Now, what Elizabeth encountered, as I said, was truly shocking. 3 young children were laying huddled together in the master bed. At the foot of the bed was Alice Ann Farrer. But it was the sight, the grisly sight, that it was truly horrific. All 4 people, not just the children, but the mother herself, they were saturated in blood. Elizabeth, frightened and horrified by what she'd seen, she turned, screaming as she was running down these steps as she made her way outside. She screamed out, "She has killed her children." Now, a labourer by the name of James Fell, who lived at number 47 Hyndburn Road, he was hearing all the commotion. He could hear the screaming from outside. So he came rushing out to see what was going on. And when he was told of what had been discovered in the master bedroom, and after checking for himself, he fled the scene and quickly made his way up towards Blackburn Road. Now we're going to make our way towards where 43 Hyndburn Road once stood. The area is completely transformed in the many years since this story took place. Long gone are the soot fields and the soot covered houses. Nothing that was there back in 1894 is there today. But we're still going to go to that location regardless. We will put some overlay maps over so you guys can see exactly where number 43 once stood. Number 43 was once located directly where we're pointing the arrow now. And what we'll do, we'll overlay some old maps from the 1800s, early 1900s, which clearly show 43 being in this location. Now, as you can see, there's a big industrial unit now, which has been built over that once row of terraced houses. We're currently stood behind and towards the side of these units. So the back of 43, number 43, would have been round about there where the arrow is. But that is the home and the premises of where Alice Ann Farrer, along with her husband Richard and the 3 children, once lived. This part behind this unit effectively is the back garden of number 43, just beyond these grey railings here. So it would have been there and in the upper bedroom where Alice sadly took the life of one of her children and tried to take the lives of the remaining 2, obviously as well as her own life. On the bed lay 8-year-old Esther Hannah Farrer. Her throat had been savagely cut and sadly she was dead. Next to her lay her 2 younger sisters, Elizabeth 6 and Isabella 4. And whilst they had their throats cut, luckily they were still alive, but only just. At the foot of the bed was their mother, Alice Farrer. Now, blood covered her clothes and a rope was also found tied around her neck. She had attempted to cut her own throat in an act of suicide, but the cuts were minor, nothing more than small wounds. When Police Sergeant Bale approached the bed, Alice spoke to him in a dull, low tone of voice, and she asked him, "What's to do? What's to do?" Now, Sergeant Bale replied with, "I don't know yet." To which Alice responded saying, "I want to go to my mother." Now, we're not too sure about Alice's mother, whether or not she had sadly passed away herself at some point, and Alice was referring to trying to take her own life so she could be with her mother. We're not sure. But she certainly told Police Sergeant Bale that she wanted to go to her mother. Alice seemed dazed, utterly disconnected from the carnage around her. Now, obviously, this is a crime scene, instantly obvious to the police and all concerned. And not before too long, 2 doctors were called, not 1 but 2. There was Dr. Geddy and Dr. Cowell. And together, when they made their way into number 43, they began quickly helping the injured. Instantly, they knew, obviously, poor Esther had sadly passed away. So they went to attend to the children first, Elizabeth and Isabella. Thankfully and miraculously, the 2 children were still alive. They had superficial cuts to the throats, but not enough to cause death. Once they attended to the children, they then attended to Alice herself. And again, the cuts to Alice's throat were also superficial. But bizarrely, she had a rope tied around her neck, but it wasn't facilely tied around the throat itself and around the neck. This can't be explained thoroughly. All we know is she was found with a rope around her neck. But it was after helping Alice and obviously stitching the superficial cuts, they then took her towards Oak Street and where the former police station once was. It was within an hour of arriving at 43 Ironburn Road and upon the discovery of the 3 children, that Alice herself was brought here to Oak Street in the centre of Accrington. And the former police station is just on our left, just where that gentleman is now. But that is the former police station, and it's there where Alice herself was brought to. And it is here where she would make a startling confession. Richard Farrer, Alice's husband and the children's father, he was summoned from his workplace. A yarn dresser at Steiner's Dye Works, Richard arrived only to be refused entry into his own home. Now obviously he didn't have a clue what was happening at this point, but he caught a glimpse of Alice being escorted into a police cab where she would then be taken to nearby Oak Street and the police station itself. Now Richard became overcome with emotion, and he went to number 47 Steiner Street and the home of his sister Elizabeth Greenwood. And as we know, Elizabeth was the lady who first came across the body of Esther and obviously the injured children at number 43. It was while she was being questioned at the Oak Street police station that Alice, she would tell the police that she tried to take the lives of all 3 children as well as herself because she was fearful of her children being taken away. She also told the police that she was fearful of the circus shows. Now, we don't know anything too much about what all this meant. We don't know if children had been taken, and possibly by gypsies or by travelling circus shows, but certainly Alice was afraid that her children would be taken, and for some strange reason she mentioned circus and travelling shows. Bizarrely, some people will say, Alice went on to say that she was glad Esther was dead, because now, in her own words, at least she knew where she was. Alice also expressed regret that Elizabeth and Isabella had survived, and she whispered to Dr. Cowie, "I wish I was dead." The following day, the 19th of September, the inquest into the death of Esther, as well as the attempted murder of her 2 sisters, took place. And Alice herself, she would take to the stand, albeit slightly weary. Upon questioning, she grew tired, she was dazed, and it was obvious that her mental state, her mental health, was deteriorating quite rapidly. But when she was asked why she did it, she simply replied with, "I don't know." Alice was she was questioned about where she got the razor from. And she would explain how it was an old one that had been used by her husband, Richard. It was unused at this point, hadn't been used for quite a while, but it also had a jagged edge. Now, this would go on to explain the horrific nature of the children's wounds. It was on October the 2nd when Alice was returned to Accrington to stand before the Mayor, Frederick N. Haywood, and she would be charged with capital murder. Now, Richard, her husband, took to the stand, detailing their life together. He would tell the jury that he had been married to Alice for 10 years, having relocated from Baycut, from where they once lived, to Accrington in 1892. They had moved there with 3 children. They had 5 children, but only 3 were surviving. Now, interestingly, it was in May that same year that Richard and Alice would lose a son. And it's this death which many believed plays a big part, an important part, for the reasoning behind Alice's actions back in September 1894. Richard went on to describe Alice's deteriorating mental health, saying that since April she had shown signs of depression, worsened by the loss of a baby boy in May that same year. Neighbours had noticed changes in her, signs of melancholy, and some had begun to fear that she may be dangerous. Now, on the evening and the night before the tragedy, Richard would tell the jury, the court, that nothing seemed amiss, but that Alice herself had been up in the early hours of the morning, just walking around the house in a quiet, dazed sort of way. Now, apparently, this had become the norm for Alice, and Richard and the rest of his family, his children, had come to accept it for what it was. They realised that Alice had obviously been suffering with melancholy, with depression, and obviously it seemed to have escalated somewhat after the death of their baby boy in May. So to Richard, to see his wife Alice walking around, or hearing her walking around in the early hours, it seemed quite normal at this point, So he was quite right when he told the jury that nothing seemed amiss the night before the tragedy. Neighbours Stephen and Mary Elizabeth Jackson testified that they were awakened around 6 a.m. by the sound of a child screaming, "Oh mother, do give over." They knocked on the wall but soon heard a knock back, assuming the matter was now resolved. Dr. Geddy and Cowie, they would speak at the inquest about how they had spoken with Alice and confirmed her fears, in which she said that she was scared of people coming to take her children away. But they were also interested in mention a conversation that they had with Alice, and that was Alice told them both that she had a family member that was taken away and placed into an asylum. Now, towards the end of their witness testimonies, they would both agree that Alice was indeed insane. Taken to the stand herself, Alice recalled suffering a sudden pain in her head that morning, and this was after Richard, her husband, had left for work, and that she lost all sense of reality. Now, it seems that when Alice was placed into a cell and she was left alone for some while, it seems that her demeanour began to change. And it seems that realisation kicked in, and that she was now accepting that what she had done was indeed sadly wrong. It goes in stark contrast to what she originally told the police, in that she was sad that the other two children hadn't died along with her sister Esther. But from all accounts and from reading the newspaper articles, the two doctors would go on to say that Alice herself had asked about the well-being of the two surviving children, and the doctors told Alice that they were now safe and well. Now, after hearing all of the witness testimonies, such as those from the immediate witnesses, the first on the scenes, so those that found the lifeless body of Esther, as well as obviously the injured children, the police, the doctors, etc., the jury found Alice guilty of willful murder, and she was sentenced to Preston Jail. However, she would not stand trial at the next Manchester Assizes. The Home Secretary, Herbert Henry Asquith, intervened on the 2nd of October 1894. Asquith declared a trial unnecessary, ordering Alice to be committed to the Prestwich Asylum, where she would be transferred to on the 16th of that same month. Alice would spend the rest of her life incarcerated within the boundaries of the asylum until her death in September 1915. So it is here in Bacup Cemetery where, on the 10th of September 1915, Alice will be interred alongside the daughter she had murdered. On Sunday, September the 22nd, 1894, Esther Hannah Farrer was laid to rest in Bacup Cemetery. The night before, the body of Esther had been moved from the mortuary to her aunt's house at number 47 Steiner Street, and from 8 p.m. onwards, mourners came in a steady stream to pay their final respects. She was dressed in a beautiful white shroud, her coffin made from pitch pine and adorned with brass fittings, and it bore the inscription, Esther Hannah Farrer, died September 18th, 1894, aged 8 years. Sadly, and after spending some time narrowing down grave C291, we have finally found the final resting place of Esther, and it is here. And unfortunately, there is no headstone with any clues, any inclination, any idea that it is indeed here where she's buried. So we've had to narrow it down on these two graves at the side. You've got C293, 292, and then 291, where we've just placed the purple rose. But here is not just Esther's final resting place, but it is also the final resting place of her mother, Alice, the very same person that took young Esther's life. And it is also the final resting place of Richard, obviously Esther's father and Alice's husband. So we know there's three family members all buried in this location, in this plot. But it's just so sad again, there is no headstone to remember these people. So as we leave Bacup Cemetery behind us, We hope you've enjoyed today's story. We appreciate it's a sensitive subject when it comes to mental health, melancholy, as it was described back in the 1800s, or depression. People around the world suffer from depression on a daily basis. We really do appreciate that. But if you can, please remember the full context of the story before commenting. I'm not going to demonise poor Alice in any way. I'm also not going to say what she did was the right thing. Obviously, it isn't. Taking the life of children or any life is abhorrent and should never happen. But we have to remember the full story. We have to take into context and put ourselves in the shoes of Alice. Now, I know that's difficult. I appreciate that. And obviously, we will never know what Alice was truly feeling. We have covered a similar story where a father and mother took the lives of their 3 children because they were fearful of the future, fearful of wars breaking out. And the same could be said for this story. Alice was suffering from severe depression, melancholy. She thought people were coming to take her children away. She also had this fear that there was no future for her children from other accounts we've read, in that she didn't want them working all hours in these extremely dangerous mills. There was no future for children in it. But she was seriously struggling with depression. She was also left alone for many, many hours. Daily, her husband was at work. He was coming home tired. He didn't have time for families. And I know he kind of loved his wife and his children. I get the impression Alice felt all alone in the world. But please remember all that when commenting down below. But tell us your thoughts regardless. Also, if you can, please share today's video because it does help the channel grow. Give us a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We really do appreciate the support you guys give us. But as you always say, as we leave Bacup Cemetery, look after yourself first and foremost, but be kind to others and stay safe and stay curious. In a house of stone and soot, where the morning rarely stays, she sits beside the cooling grate and counts the hollow days. The hearth is low, the voice is gone, no laughter fills the air. The schoolyard holds her children now, the mills, her husband's care. The cradle stands with nothing near, no warmth, no breath, no song. A broken thread of mother's love that's waited far too long. With each ticking clock a distant bell, each creak a whispered name, she walks the halls of sorrow's house and bears the unseen flame. She dreams of tiny hands once held, of lullabies and light. Now all that's left are folded clothes and tears she hides from sight. Dust and silence, walls that weep, shadows where the memories sleep. Time moves slow and love feels far. Underneath, a grieving star.